Without taking further ado, as I welcome you, I'd like to recognize the presence of a few individuals who've joined us today. We have the FCDO lead, Anne McKinnon. We also have the Humanity and Inclusion Director, Margaret Nguhi. In our presence, we also have a representative from the State Department of Social Protection, Tina Mungatana. We also have with us the Director of Kilimanjaro Blind Trust Africa, Supana Biswas. Okay, to give us the welcome remarks, I'd like to welcome Ian McKinnon, who is the Director of Inclusive Design at GDI. Ian, karibu.
Thank you, Sheila. Thank you so much. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah? Sound all right? Oh. Hello. I need to lean like this. Okay, I shall lean like this. Oh, you can raise it. Okay, perfect. Okay, how's that? Good? Perfect. I wasn't going to do my my sign, but my sign is actually, my sign name is actually this. Because that's the bagpipes, and I am originally from Scotland. So there we go. So let me begin by welcoming you all here. Thank you. I just want to say thank you so much to everyone for coming. And we hope the interest here in the room reflects the keen desire to help make Nairobi one of the most accessible and inclusive cities in the world. This is a hybrid event today, so we have people watching online, as well as here in the room in Nairobi. And so I'd also like to extend a very warm welcome to all of those watching live streaming online from all around the world. I know we have lots joining online, so a warm welcome to you. Today's agenda then, let me click through the slides. Today's agenda, today's a big day. It's a big day for us. We officially launch our case study report on disability access and inclusion in the city of Nairobi. The report is now freely available to download online as a PDF, both the full report and also an executive summary report, and we'll show you where to get those a little bit later. Our hope is that this report becomes a tool to support the city of Nairobi become a more accessible and inclusive city. Some good work is happening, but as with every city, there is always more to be done. And this report highlights some of the key challenges, gives some key recommendations, but ultimately outlines the opportunities for progress. We're delighted to have here today our funder, UK Government's Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, FCDO, our partners in this work, KBTA, Kilimanjaro Blind Trust Africa, and Konkui Design Initiative, and as you've heard, we have representatives from national government, local government, and the National Council for Persons with Disabilities. In the audience, we also have many friends and colleagues, including some of the stakeholders and participants who took part in the research last year. And we have colleagues from British High Commission and UN Habitat, and many more collaborators, friends, colleagues, working in disability and inclusive design and the AT space, both here in Nairobi and internationally. So before we hand over to our keynote introductory speakers, let me just give a very quick 5 minutes to introduce you all to the Global Disability Innovation Hub, GDI Hub, and also the AT2030 program, of which this Nairobi case study report forms part. So let me do that. So GDI Hub is a research and practice centre driving innovation for a fairer world. We're an academic research centre housed within University College London, UCL, in London in the UK, and we're also a not-for-profit community interest company, which allows us to do our non-academic research programme delivery, such as the AT2030 programme. So we're a relatively new organisation. We were launched in 2016, so we're able to bring, we believe, a new perspective into the disability sector. We use very bold approaches to try and accelerate positive change. And co-creation, co-design, participation, collaboration, working very much with persons with disabilities rather than producing things for is central to everything that we do. It's at the heart of everything that we do at GDI Hub, and that includes the AT2030 programme. So our history is quite interesting because we are one of the kind of lasting permanent legacies from the 2012 Paralympic Games, which took place a decade ago. I can almost believe it. And some of our founding partners have a close connection to the Olympic Park site. But what was interesting was those cultural and educational institutions who are our founding partners were all doing really interesting work on disability. But it was very separate, it was very disparate. So what GDI Hub has been able to do is to bring all of that work together in one place to try and maximize the impact that it can have. Because that's what we want to do, have real impact. So we work across lots of domains and themes. AT, assistive technology, obviously is a big one, but also is inclusive design of the built environment. And that's what we're going to talk about today, and that's the work that I lead for GDI Hub. So really what we're doing is able to hopefully share and translate a lot of the learning and experience that we've gathered over the many years, including the work on the Olympic Park in London, and share that now internationally, working predominantly across Africa, across Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, to hopefully share some of that knowledge and experience on inclusive design, so that when in these countries where there is huge infrastructure taking place, huge development taking place, they can learn from some of the mistakes that we've made and not make them, and make sure that they're embedding inclusive design at the beginning and at the heart of these big projects. That's our hope. We have launched an inclusive design strategy. This is also free to download online, and we can show you where to get that. This gives a good high-level overview of our approach to inclusive city design, so I recommend you download that. The AT2030 program, which is funded by UK Aid, is a big program, so I'm not going to go into huge detail here. I'm going to give a very high-level overview. But if you want to find out more, check out AT2030.org or come and speak to us afterwards, and we'll be very happy to talk to you about it. But essentially, the title of the project is Testing What Works to Improve Access to Life-Changing Assistive Technology for All. And how we deliver that, again, is through collaboration, through partnerships. It's central to all the work that we do. And there's 70+ partners involved in AT2030 at one stage or another. So a fundamental part of the work that we do. Some of the key ones to highlight: World Health Organization, UNICEF, the Clinton Health Access Initiative, UCL, of course, to name but a few. And also working closely with local and national governments in the countries that we work in. So just some high-level statistics. We know that around 2.5 billion people in the world need some form of assistive technology, be that wheelchairs, prosthetics, hearing aids, spectacles, digital tools. Yet in developing countries, access can be as low as 3%. So that's really what the program is trying to address. And by the end, we'll have reached 29 million people, directly and indirectly. We will have worked across 35 different countries. And the funding from UK Aid to this program currently is £19.8 million. So it's a big program, currently in its 4th year. And we've made a commitment to match fund that through both in-cash and kind contributions. So by the end, the program should have a total value of around £40 million. So it's a significant innovators, entrepreneurs, is central to some of that work. So I'm not going to go into this in too much detail because I don't have the time now, but the program, to try and simplify it, has been broken down into 4 clusters. So data and evidence, because data and evidence is really lacking, especially around disability. So looking at trying to improve the data on disability to help us make better decisions on what's needed. Innovation, as I've said, we've been supporting entrepreneurs, innovators, particularly around AT, to try and get them to market and scale them. We've been looking at country implementation, so really looking at how we shape markets in countries, change systems to really open up market access to AT in the countries that we're working in. And then the 4th cluster is around capacity, building capacity and participation of local communities. So this is very much a two-way dialogue. It's not just us going in and kind of saying we have this experience. We're learning everywhere that we go, all the way through the program, working with communities. And this part of the program is also where we look at stigma and attitudes, and it's also where our work sits in the work we're going to talk about today, which is the built environment. Because we understand that if you get AT, that's great, but if attitudes and stigma where you live prevent you from leaving your house, then how effective is it really? And likewise, if the built environment or the city in which you live still stops you, prevents you from using that AT, how effective is it? And that's where this report and this research strand comes into play. So we know that you need good access, an accessible city, good inclusive city, in order to access the AT that you might need. And so that is one of the sub-programs of AT2030 that we lead, inclusive infrastructure. And it's inclusive infrastructure that this case study report from Nairobi sits under. So the Nairobi case study report that we're very happy to launch here at this event today is actually our fourth. It's the fourth of 6 city case studies that we will do. The first ones were Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia, Varanasi in India, Surakarta in Indonesia, and today we launched Nairobi. So that's 4, and they're all available to get the reports online to download as free as a PDF. The 2 subsequent reports will be Freetown in Sierra Leone, which we'll publish very soon, and then Medellin in Colombia, which we'll publish next year. And then what we're going to do with these case study reports, including today's Nairobi report, will be to look across the 6, compare and contrast them, look at what are the similarities, what are the differences in these cities in terms of disability inclusion, to then write a comparison report which will feed into our global action report that we will publish next year. And I've got what I'm going to say on that here. Hang on. Yeah, and so we hope that the global action report is going to bring about a step change in how global cities are planned, designed, built, and operated to ensure that cities work for all citizens, including persons with disabilities. And in doing so, we believe that cities can then better address current issues, such as climate change, in an equal way that ensures no one is left behind. So hopefully that has been a helpful introduction from me, and it gives me great pleasure to hand back to Sheila, I think, who will introduce you to our introductory keynote speakers. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Ian, for the welcoming remarks. And to our first speaker for the afternoon, I'd like to welcome Anne McKinnon, the lead FCDO.
Thank you for such a warm introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming today and for inviting me just to say a few words of introduction. My name, as Sheila said, is Anne McKinnon, and I represent the UK's Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. That's a bit of a mouthful, so I'm going to refer to it as FCDO. We provide UK aid funding to the Inclusive Infrastructure Programme, which, as Ian has said, is part of AT2030. I work in our Research and Evidence Directorate, and one of my roles is to lead AT2030. Thank you. I'm delighted to be with you in person for the first time today in Nairobi and streaming live to those who can't be here today. FCDO published its Disability Inclusion and Rights Strategy earlier this year. Assistive technology is described as an enabler in our strategy, meaning it is crucial to enable people to fulfill their human rights and freedoms, to access education, healthcare, employment, and to participate fully in their communities, and provide equal opportunities for those affected by humanitarian and protracted crisis. But we do need to do more to protect the most vulnerable against climate change, and we need to ensure that women and girls have equal access with boys and men. In our strategy action plan, we have committed to supporting GDI Hub and to do more on assistive technology. Our AT2030 programme is building the foundation. It is a global programme testing what works to improve affordable access to assistive technology such as wheelchairs, hearing aids, prosthetics and orthotics, spectacles and digital devices. The programme supports solutions to scale with a focus on innovative products, new service delivery models and building global capacity. AT2030 looks across the whole ecosystem, including research on the national policy level and securing budget lines from government, working with communities to understand how and where they access assistive technology, implementing community and schools programmes to reduce stigma associated with assistive tech, working with local entrepreneurs to design innovations for local contexts, and, of course, considering if the built environment or roads, buildings, transport and communications are accessible for people using assistive tech. This week in Nairobi, we have seen just how important AT2030's work is in Nairobi and across Kenya. We talked to one of our Assistive Tech Impact Fund investees, HereX. The AT Impact Fund supports proven product and service models with capital and venture building support to reach scale. HereX are now providing affordable hearing aids in 6 low-income communities across Kenya. And on Monday, we met with the Kilimanjaro Blind Trust Association, who have worked with us not only on this inclusive infrastructure study, but they are also an integral part of our Innovate Now programme, where they facilitate our live labs. And by live labs, we mean labs that enable assistive tech entrepreneurs to co-design and test their products using a deep human-centred design approach, ensuring that new products meet the needs of the people who will use them. We also met with the Clinton Health Access Initiative, working with government, NGOs and DPOs to develop policies that target assistive tech. And we met with Innovate Now entrepreneurs such as Riziki Source, who have set up a job matching and training website for people with disabilities. Safari Seat, who are developing a manual wheelchair for particularly rough terrain. And this morning, we met with Lincell Technology, who are developing electric tricycles for the local community. But as Ian said in his introduction, we can create affordable assistive tech, but if the environment has not been designed with accessibility in mind, this can render the products as obsolete and more likely to be abandoned. Therefore, we really need to consider the whole picture. Before I hand back to our speakers to hear further introductions and about the results from the Nairobi study, I'd just like to thank those involved. The Kilimanjaro Blind Trust Association, the Ministry of Social Protection, Konkui Design Institute, the National Council for Persons with Disabilities, GDI Hub, and of course, all of those who participated in the study. And I'd like to give a special thanks to all of the speakers who are here today. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about the outcomes of the study, so I won't take up any more of your time and I'll hand back over to Sheila. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. That was Anne McKinnon, the Disability Assistive Technology Advisor, Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. Before I welcome the next speaker, I'd like to request our technical team to play a video. All right, as they prepare themselves, this is the time that probably you can take to know the name of the person seated next to you, right? Tell them they look beautiful this afternoon. Even if you're lying, just say it. Okay, we have another 30 seconds, so you can know the name of the person seated behind you. Just stretch your neck if you can. The person seated behind you. Okay, great. As we do that, now that you know the person seated next to you and the person seated behind you, we also have an online audience, and this conversation is also going on online. So I'll just like to request you to use the hashtag inclusive infrastructure. Is it? Hashtag inclusive infrastructure Nairobi. Inclusive Nairobi, thank you for that. Hashtag inclusive Nairobi. Please tweet that. You can also post it on your social media channels. Okay, the video is ready.
Kilimanjaro Blind Trust Africa, or KBTA, works to unlock literacy for learners with visual impairment in East Africa and Malawi. Every learner with visual impairment has a right to quality education and opportunities for employment in diverse areas towards independence and inclusion. KBTA provides access to digital braille assistive devices that represent the reading and writing material for learners with visual impairment. We support visually impaired learners across 250 primary and secondary schools, as well as tertiary institutions, to transition from mechanical braille to digital technology through an affordable and multifunctional digital braille assistive device called the Orbit Reader 20. The Orbit Reader is a true game changer. It is revolutionizing the participation of visually impaired learners with their teachers in inclusive classrooms across Kenya. We provide full service along with the Orbit Reader 20. We provide curriculum content, training of teachers and technicians, as well as the repair and maintenance of the devices. KBTA has distributed 2,000 Orbit Readers across 250 schools and colleges in East Africa and Malawi. KBTA's ambitious goal is to ensure that every learner with visual impairment in school has access to a functional digital braille assistive device. The Orbit Reader 20 has changed the paradigm on how visually impaired learners access quality education with improved classroom participation, teacher-learner interaction, better performance, increased transition to higher levels of education, access to STEM subjects, and greater levels of confidence. An additional 1,000 devices are urgently needed to fill the gap and ensure that every visually impaired learner in school has an Orbit Reader. Unlock literacy for life by supporting KBTA to open real opportunities for the visually impaired learner in schools and colleges so that they can reach their true potential like any other learner and become independent and active citizens. We are so grateful to all of our heroes who have supported our cause in promoting inclusion for learners with visual impairment. With your support, inclusion can be real. Visit www.kilimanjaro-blindtrust.org to donate.
All right, thank you so much. To crown that video, I'd like to welcome the next speaker, Supana Biswas, the Director, Kilimanjaro Blind Trust Africa. Karibu.
Thank you, Sheila. Distinguished guests. Am I audible? Yeah. So good afternoon, distinguished guests, partners, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. I wish to welcome every one of you to this long-awaited, very exciting launch of the report for inclusive Nairobi as a city. My name is Suparna Biswas, and I work for Kilimanjaro Blind Trust Africa, and you've just seen a bit of what we do. To add to that, I'd like to say that our programs, our ambition is for to be able to deliver these assistive digital braille assistive devices around Africa. We started with 5 countries in East Africa and Malawi, and we are bringing in a new country, which is Ethiopia. So we are in Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, and Malawi, and now we are starting in Ethiopia. It's a huge challenge because these assistive devices are not cheap. And along with the assistive devices, as you've seen, we provide training to teachers, we train school-based technicians. But what is important is that we provide an end-to-end program. We started with access to quality education through digital literacy and skills. And our next step is to provide access to STEM subjects, coding, computer programming, all kinds of different areas that persons with visual impairment, the youth with visual impairment did not have any opportunities to access. And assistive technology has made that possible. And the third pillar of our program is access to employability skills as well as employment. Of course, KBTA works with partners across all the countries where we work, including government, the private sector, other organizations, other agencies, and so on, to get where we want to deliver our ambition. Since we started delivering digital assistive devices, we have been able to provide 2,000 of these devices across 200 schools in the 5 countries where we've been working at a cost of $2 million. And this is just the tip of the iceberg because we have so many other countries to reach out to. So within our partnership, we've also partnered with Global Disability and Innovation Hub, and that is how we were involved. We were the lead local partner in Kenya to support the Inclusive Infrastructure project. For this project, our job was to work with KDI, another local partner, and collect information, data, and make it available to GDI in the UK. It was important for us to look at the reality of accessibility for those with disabilities within Nairobi. It was also a very interesting process and exposed many interesting facts that will be shared with you as the report is presented very soon. Nairobi is a beautiful cosmopolitan city with a population of 4.3 million with a wonderful infrastructure. Yet it has half of its population and a population living in informal settlements, and 1.1% of this population are spread across slum areas and peri-urban settlements due to growing poverty associated with disability and the high cost of living. Is Nairobi a city that is inclusive in its design? Is it accessible to all those who live in this massive city? You will soon find out. The research process required us to mobilize the stakeholders of city design, including the government, construction industry, the private sector, and persons with disabilities, to understand the reality on the ground, as well as to collect relevant data. We were able to obtain the approval from the National Commission of Science, Technology, and Innovation, NACOSTI, This is the Regulatory and Licensing Authority on Scientific Research in Kenya. With the authorization to conduct the research, we started face-to-face interviews with a sample of all the sectors identified as key to the research. KBTA continued to collaborate with Concrete Design Initiatives, KDI, who were our partner in Nairobi. And we worked with many, many different groups, trying to get information, trying to hear about their feedback from stakeholders and from those with disabilities on how they live their lives in this amazing city. As we were engaging with those with different abilities, who are the actual beneficiaries of an inclusive city, we learned some very surprising facts. That there was a disconnect between policy and actual infrastructure, for example. The accessibility needs of persons with disabilities is still not a priority of the various project designers and developers with regard to upcoming housing and infrastructure development. As a sector, we still need to engage in advocacy and awareness towards better and barrier-free access to both private and public spaces by persons with disabilities. Some of these areas include transport, roads, housing, recreation and culture, and daily life activities and services. We found out about how public transportation has low consideration of the needs of persons with disabilities. The most surprising was when those who we were interviewing expressed their pain at being treated without regard in the mainstream of the city, and general lack of public awareness on how to support those with disabilities. Some of us who work in this sector, we sort of take it for granted that people understand and know how to support those who have any difficulties in navigating. The lack of inner city roads and hazardous sidewalks was something that came out. Low safety and security measures in the main living areas of those with disabilities, therefore increasing their vulnerability. Livelihoods in the informal sector made difficult or not viable due to many of the gaps in infrastructure. Access to recreation and social activities restricted and therefore having a real negative impact on individuals. The situation is not all bad, but there is yet so much to be done. That is what came out when we were talking to people and we were trying to understand what the reality is. In all of these areas, a lot of detail and specifics were reviewed. It is through research like this that wonderful cities like Nairobi can be so, for all concerned and not just for a segment of the population. Understanding the problem is the first step to finding the solutions. Given that Kenya has such advanced policies supporting the inclusion of those with disabilities, the stakeholders, that is public, private, and others, have a duty to collaborate and work towards improving inclusivity of those who also have a part in living in this city of Nairobi. Today is a great opportunity for the public and private sector to think about working hand in hand to make Nairobi a truly inclusive city. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That is Supana Biswas, the Executive Director, Kilimanjaro Blind Trust Africa. All right. Before we go to the next segment, I'll remind us again that the hashtag that we're using on Twitter is hashtag Inclusive Nairobi. Hashtag Inclusive Nairobi. You can take a selfie with your now found friend, you know, that person seated next to you or the one behind you, and post it on Twitter. Because in the next segment, especially as we do the findings, you can be able to post that. We also have photos of you already posted there, so you might get one for your profile picture, right? Okay. For the next segment, this is the presentation of the case study report, and I'd like to welcome on stage Michaela Patrick, the Senior Inclusive Design Researcher at GDI, and Gloria Tanui, the Senior Design Coordinator at Conquay Design Initiative, that is KDI. Gloria and Michaela. We say karibu sana, which means welcome.
Thank you, Sheila. Can everyone hear me okay? Well, hello, everyone. And as Sheila introduced, I'm Michaela Patrick, and I'm a senior researcher at the Global Disability Innovation Hub. I'll let Gloria introduce herself in a minute, but I'm going to kick us off with a bit of an introduction to the research. So, as has already been mentioned, this is a case study looking at inclusive design and accessibility of the built environment in Nairobi in Kenya, which we've conducted in partnership with Conquay Design Initiative and Kilimanjaro Blind Trust Africa. So I think everyone in the room is familiar with the city of Nairobi, but for the benefit of our audience joining us online, I thought I'd do a little bit of an introduction. So Nairobi is the capital of Kenya. It's a vibrant city that, as Subhana already mentioned, is a cosmopolitan city, and it's also known for being a technology and innovation hub. These are some of the reasons why we think it's such a great city to lead by example in terms of showing the world what an inclusive city looks like. We at GDI Hub are also really proud to say that it's also home to Innovate Now, which is the first assistive technology startup ecosystem in Africa. So Nairobi has a population of around 4.5 million. Its population is also growing. There are increasing challenges that the city is facing, including things like drought and other climate-related disasters. This is placing a burden on infrastructure and causing issues and increasing inequality for the local population. We also know that around 50% of the population are living in informal settlements where access to things like infrastructure is even more challenging, and where things like urban planning and conventional accessibility regulations we might use may not apply, creating more difficult, more inaccessible environments that we would like to improve. So there are at least 42,703 persons with disabilities living in Nairobi. That's data from the 2019 census, but it's also likely an underestimate, as the WHO says that around 15% of our global population are persons with disabilities. This is a huge part of our global population, and we want to make sure that all of these people, really that everyone, can access the cities that they live in the way that they would like. So as already been mentioned, Nairobi has already made some great progress in terms of disability inclusion, predominantly through having really strong legal frameworks that predate the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. This timeline might be a little bit difficult to read, but it's tracking the progress that Kenya as a country has been making in terms of legislation towards accessibility. So including things like the first Disability Act in 2003, through to the draft building code that's only been published this year that's improving accessibility requirements for the country as a whole. But what we do know is that while strong legal frameworks are a great start, implementation is a real challenge, and that's one of the reasons why with this research we're engaging a wide range of stakeholders to make sure that we find out what the sticking points are around implementation, to make sure we find out the how of how we can do better. So we firmly believe that inclusive design is a process of collaboration, and we need everybody to play a role in making an inclusive city. So for this reason, in our research, we engage 3 stakeholder groups, which we call people with disabilities and citizens living in Nairobi; practice, which is built environment industry professionals who are living and working in the city of Nairobi, designing and building the city itself; and lastly, and really importantly, policy, so government stakeholders who are taking leadership, who are taking the decisions that can shape how inclusive our city is. So with this research, we wanted to understand both the current context in terms of the state of accessibility and inclusion in the city as is experienced day to day, but also identify opportunities and recommendations to support the city towards becoming more inclusive. So some of the questions we're asking include things like what current policy, regulation or guidelines currently exist? What is it like to live with a disability in Nairobi? And what does good inclusive infrastructure look like in the city of Nairobi? And how can inclusive infrastructure support assistive technology use? So the methods we use to do this include interviews, photo diaries, co-design activities, and workshops. These diverse methods help us to learn about people's day-to-day experiences and the challenges they face, but also really importantly, their aspirations for a more inclusive Nairobi. So here's just a quick insight from an interview. So this person in their interview said, sometimes, even though I have an assistive technology to get me to a sink to wash my hands, the sink has been built too high. The built environment must be designed inclusively to complement assistive technology. So therefore, inclusive design is an enabler for assistive technology. We also have photo diaries, which really capture the day-to-day lives of people with disabilities living in Nairobi. And I put these two images up to show how these photo diaries were used to capture both the challenges and also the good that we're seeing in the city. So in the image on the left, you can see a wheelchair user in an environment which is inaccessible. And on the right, we can see a wheelchair user in front of a building that's currently building a ramp to make sure that that building is accessible for the people that would like to use that space. Now sorry about that. I'll say that again. So on the left, we can see an example of an inaccessible public space. And on the right, we can see an example of a ramp that's being built outside a building. I'd now like to hand over to Gloria, who's going to talk a bit about the co-design workshops that we held as part of this study.
Thank you, Michaela. I hope you can hear me okay. My name is Gloria. I'm from Concrete Design Initiative, and we work in informal settlements with underserved communities, and we have been doing so for the past 16 years. And one of the core principles in KDI is participatory design. So we were very happy to take part in this research. And during the co-design workshops, we had 3 separate workshops. Each of them was dedicated to different groups of disabilities. This way we were able to understand and tailor the different activities for accessibility depending on the different participants' needs. We needed to make the workshop work for the participants depending on their disabilities, while also maintaining data collection objectives. So one of the activities we had was the journey mapping. So the aim of the journey mapping was to understand from the participants how they move around Nairobi, and also to pick out some of the challenges and opportunities for accessibility and inclusivity, depending on their experience. We did this through posing a question to the participants to describe to us one journey that they found difficult and one that they found enjoyable. And we were able to draw out some themes and insights from this. For example, one of the participants mentioned that at the Thika Road Mall, they find it quite accessible and inclusive because there are escalators, the lighting is super, and there's adequate space and there's no congestion. That way they're able to walk safely. This feeds into some of the themes about security, where they're able to move around independently. Another activity we had was the participatory mapping. During this activity, we were guided by the participants, where they picked out spaces, structures, and streets within Nairobi that they found accessible and inclusive. And they also mentioned some spaces that they did not find inclusive. And this was based on their first-hand experience visiting these spaces. So some of the structures or buildings that they found accessible is like the KICC and the Kenya National Library, and they found it quite accessible and inclusive. So the purpose of this particular activity was to celebrate some of the spaces within Nairobi that are already inclusive and accessible, and to be used as a case study for further research. So once we had the participatory mapping and also the journey mapping, during the entire workshop, we noted down various themes that came out during about their experience. For example, transport, infrastructure, universal design, assistive technology, amongst others. So this was to help us to understand where do we start in the pursuit of an inclusive Nairobi. So the participants voted and selected some themes that they found quite pressing, and once they're addressed would be quite impactful for them. At the end of the series of the co-design workshops, we brought together professionals from diverse fields, some of whom are present. And during the multi-stakeholder workshop, we selected the particular stakeholders based on the various themes that came out during the co-design workshop. And this included a community of practice covering government, private practice, civil society, amongst others. And the aim of the multi-stakeholder workshop was to share and validate some of the insights from the co-design workshops with people living with disability, and also to discuss recommendations and tangible steps towards achieving some of the priorities that the people living with disabilities mentioned in the co-design workshop. Also, it was an opportunity to build partnership and also further champion some of the insights that the stakeholders were able to draw during the session. But ultimately, it was to validate the workshop findings against the knowledge from the stakeholders from the community of practice within here in Nairobi. So I'll hand over to Michaela to take us through the priorities. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Gloria. These workshops are so important to make sure that while we're doing data collection, we keep checking in with our participants and with key stakeholders to make sure that the findings are really relevant for the work for the people living in the city that have the opportunity to deliver on the recommendations. So there's a huge amount of insights we've collected as part of this study, and all of the in-depth insights are available to you through the report, which you can access online, which is about 100 pages long, so there's a huge amount of detail in there. What we've tried to do here is distill the insights into 4 major themes that we think cut across what are the key things to enable an inclusive city for people with disabilities. What we know is that people living in Nairobi should feel able to independently and safely participate in daily life in the city, whether that's going to work, going to school, visiting a park, or meeting a friend to play chess. These are all key aspects of daily life, and we want to make sure that all of these experiences are accessible. So the 4 key areas we've distilled the insights into are, firstly, housing and basic infrastructure, secondly, transportation and roads, then daily life activities and services, and lastly, recreation and culture. And I'll now take you through these in a bit more detail. So here we see a picture from one of our photo diaries that was collected by our participants, and you can see our participant entering their home. You can see that this home has been built with a ramp to access the home to cross the drain that is dividing the road and the entrance to the home. However, you can also see that there are still some bumps and rough terrain that might make using this ramp a little bit difficult. What we know is that access to an accessible home is a really key thing for people with disabilities, and that includes things like having level access to your house, having a door wide enough for a wheelchair user to enter their home, having sanitation services within your house so that you can look after yourself and have a good quality of life. So one of the barriers we found in this theme is affordable and accessible housing. We need to make this a priority to make sure that people can live in accessible homes, but also homes that are affordable to them, as housing costs were generally reported as quite high for our participants. So in this theme, what works? What do we know will help? Well, we know that community-led planning in neighbourhoods and communities is really successful in making sure that we build spaces where communities can live and interact and access basic essential services. So we would really encourage community-led design when we're thinking about housing and basic infrastructure. Next up, we're talking about transportation and roads. And here you can see another of our participants who has a visual impairment walking through the downtown of Nairobi with a guide. So transportation and roads is really a key area of challenge for people with disabilities living in Nairobi. So that includes things like public transport and the road network and having safe pedestrian spaces. And as you can see in this image, our participant is walking on the road because there's a lack of a safe pedestrian space to walk. So we would like to see transport options and road networks becoming more accessible. And that includes both the physical design of the infrastructure and equipment itself, such as an accessible bus, but also the service delivery itself. So things like awareness training for people working in public transport would be really helpful to make sure that people have a safe and enjoyable experience when they're using the public transport network. However, on the positive side, we do also see that things like road upgrading projects that have been taking place across the city are really starting to ease congestion and improve mobility in the city. So we'd like to really say that, you know, that's great, we should keep up the good work, but let's make sure that those big urban infrastructure projects that are happening across the city are always accessible as well. We also see that urban planning is really valuable in making spaces accessible. So in some newer parts of the city which have been planned from the beginning, we see that accessibility is more of a consideration, and we're creating better and safer environments for people to move around. Next up, we're talking about daily life activities and services. And by that, what we mean is accessing the spaces and services that people need to go about their day-to-day business. So that might include things like going to the bank, accessing healthcare services, or being able to visit a market. And in this image here, from another photo diary, you see one of our participants visiting a market stall, looking to buy some supplies. And she has a visual impairment, so it's really important that she's able to feel for the things that she'd like to buy. So there is an inaccessibility issue across services and essential spaces. And why this is really important is because it becomes a barrier to independence. And we want to make sure that people are able to independently access the spaces that they would like day to day and go about their business in order to live, you know, safe, enjoyable, independent lives. What we see as really successful is understanding the co-benefits of infrastructure. So when we think about developing infrastructure, think about what wider benefits it may have. So combining thinking about community, livelihoods, and health. And this can be done by pairing different types of infrastructure in similar spaces to make sure that people can access and experience a public space while also getting access to, let's say, sanitation services. We also see that creating spaces that facilitate and enable business opportunities and entrepreneurship is really great for improving people's quality of life. So lots of our participants are really entrepreneurial and want to run their own businesses. So making sure that the physical infrastructure in the environments and communities they're living allows them to run their businesses and develop and scale them if they would like to. Lastly, we have recreation and culture. So here you see one of our participants playing chess with a friend. And we've included this theme because often when we talk about inclusive infrastructure and accessibility, we focus on the really essential infrastructures that we need to live our day-to-day lives. So things like transport and health and schools. And these things are completely essential and non-negotiable when we talk about inclusion. But we also really want to champion creating an inclusive culture and making sure that people can access the recreational activities that they would like. So that might include things like playing a sport or going to church or being able to visit a park. So we mustn't forget these types of spaces when we're planning accessibility in the city. And we've actually seen some really great examples of inclusion coming through from this theme. So an example would be places of worship providing inclusive design features to make sure that their visitors are able to access the space and participate in religion day to day. And we think that's a really wonderful example where community-led initiatives can champion inclusion and show what good inclusive design looks like. So we are seeing more and more positive examples, and that's something really exciting. So for example, this is a quote from one of our participants who was talking about Nairobi Metropolitan Services, who have really been championing accessibility since they took charge, making sure that pedestrian spaces are more accessible. What we want is to start to see more of these good examples. So we also want to keep hearing from you. And we really do believe that sharing best practice and showing what works is a really great way to make sure that we continue to make Nairobi a more inclusive city, because really this is a journey, and actually there's always going to be more work to do. So we just have to keep doing the good work and keep learning as we continue to build infrastructure and develop the city. Before I take us back to the overall conclusions, I just wanted to touch a little bit on the bigger picture and talk about an inclusive planet for everybody. So what we've also seen in Nairobi is that resilience and inclusion go hand in hand. So we really need to design infrastructure. We need to design our cities to be responsive and resilient to climate and crisis. And we've really seen examples of that here in Nairobi. So things like flooding on the streets, creating inaccessibility for both pedestrians and vehicles, and actually damaging infrastructure and creating health risks. These are things that we really want to alleviate. So with that in mind, when we're developing our urban spaces, when we're thinking about building infrastructure, we also need to think about the resourcefulness of design and materials to make sure that we're designing in a way that accounts for the local resources we have available. And we believe that integrating inclusive design from the very beginning of urban development, urban planning, infrastructure projects is a great way to make sure that we think about inclusion and resilience from the beginning. A part of that is also thinking about inclusive water, sanitation, and health, which we've also found as a kind of key area of opportunity that we think should be explored further. So making sure that these types of infrastructure are enabling access and maintaining a city that's both inclusive and healthy and also resilient. So I thought I'd start the conclusion with a quote from one of our participants who said, "Yes, Nairobi has the capacity. It has the amenities and resources. What we need is the positive political will." So what I think that is really saying is what we need is you. We need all of the stakeholders and people in this room to help us, to lead by example, because we need inclusive leadership from the beginning, championing inclusion to make sure that the city continues to develop in the way that we would like. So we promised some recommendations, and I'd first like to say that if you want to find some more in-depth recommendations and really understand the detail of how we deliver inclusive design and what that looks like and what you need to do to get from A to B, I encourage you to look at the report in depth, because in that we have specific recommendations for our different stakeholder groups. So we have recommendations for the community and for organizations of persons with disabilities. We have recommendations for government and policy stakeholders, and we have recommendations for practitioners. So if you go to the report, you can have a look at those and really find recommendations that are relevant for your sector. But I've got some key overarching messages here, which I'm also very happy to talk more about. So after we finish the session, we'll be around. We're happy to discuss these in more detail. But these are the kind of headline recommendations. So we need inclusive leadership. Inclusion begins from inclusive leadership. So champion inclusion and accessibility where you can. Find opportunities to make sure that the people who need to be in the room are included in the room, and that begins with inclusive and diverse leadership. We need the building codes and regulations to support us as well. So having building codes and regulations that consider accessibility, that mandate it, so make it a requirement, is a really effective way to start by making a more inclusive city. We also need to make sure that these regulations are contextualized and relevant for the city of Nairobi. So taking attention and account for the fact that the application of standards and regulations might look different in different cities and in different parts of different cities. So working with practitioners to make sure we can realize the standards in the best way possible. We need strategy and cohesion. So that's working together, collaborating across sectors and industries, but also thinking about cohesion at the scale of design. So thinking about seamless accessibility. So it's not enough to have one building be designed in an accessible way. We need to make sure a person can also reach that building with an accessible transport network and make sure that there aren't broken links in the chain so everyone can get to where they want to go day to day. We also always, of course, need financing. So it's so important that inclusive design and accessibility is integrated into urban development project budgets so that it's realized from the beginning. And that includes making sure we account for participation within our budgets. So making sure that people with disabilities are involved in the design process from the beginning. We need inclusive design. And inclusive design is more than accessibility standards. It's more than a technical checklist that we apply to a building projects. It's really a process and a mindset of making sure that we design with people with disabilities, that people with disabilities lead in how we're designing our cities. So making sure that the spaces are fit for purpose, meet their needs, but also embrace their aspirations for what good design would look like, so that we make inclusive design also a fun and enjoyable process that creates elegant and intuitive designs that actually will benefit everybody. We need participation. I've already covered that, but it really needs to be genuine participation, making sure that it's not just a consultation process, but that people are really involved in the process and given feedback and involved in ongoing monitoring and maintenance. We need enabling environments, and this is quite a complex theme, but really it's about making sure people have the tools, resources, and environments that they need to access and enjoy their city. So that includes things like access to assistive technology. We do also need awareness raising and training. So making sure that people understand what the benefits of inclusive infrastructure are, what it looks like, how we use it, and how we look after it. So maintenance is also a really key aspect here. So let's design it well, but let's also make sure that we look after it well so that in the long term, it continues to be an inclusive space for everybody. And lastly, I already talked about this a bit, but let's think about resilience. So let's make sure that we design our inclusive design interventions with resilience in mind and sustainability in mind, so that over time we don't begin to create more accessibility barriers. So this is my last slide, and it's a bit of a vision for what we think an inclusive Nairobi looks like. We'd also love to hear from you on this, so do come tell us afterwards if you think there's another element we should add to the vision for an inclusive Nairobi. So firstly, we want inclusive mobility, and that means that people have choices and options in how they move around their city, and they're able to get to the spaces that they would like to in a safe and enjoyable way. We need inclusive infrastructure, urban planning, and services. And I've included these three things together because they're very much part of an ecosystem. Inclusive infrastructure is one part of an ecosystem of inclusion that is already starting to come together in Nairobi, but we think we can continue to build that. An inclusive Nairobi also offers enjoyable urban life. So places to play, places to do sports, places to interact with community and have social engagements. We also need to have thriving communities, security, and a just city. So that's making sure that people can be safe and secure in their city, and making sure that those who are experiencing the most inequality are included when we're talking about city planning, because that's a really key part of creating more inclusion, is making sure that those that are currently most excluded are part of the journey. We need accessible and affordable housing for everybody. So that includes persons with disabilities, but also all of us, our whole community. Let's make sure everyone can live in a place that's suitable for them and that they would like to live. Lastly, we need access to opportunities. So having an inclusive environment, inclusive infrastructure, enables people to access opportunities. And that includes going to work, going to school, starting a business, developing, an innovative solution for an assistive technology. All of these things are the kinds of opportunities we want to make sure that everyone can access on a fair and equal basis. Well, that's me. I hope that that has given you a bit of an overview of the study, and we're very happy to discuss the findings with you in more depth, and also hope that you'll go online and read the report and let us know what you think. We really enjoyed doing this study, and we really couldn't have done it without our local partners. So I'd just like to once again thank Kilimanjaro Blind Trust Africa and Kukui Design Initiative, who really showed what inclusive infrastructure, what inclusive leadership looks like in how they led this project. And I think, we have the tools. We've shown you some of the ways we can do inclusive design. We've got the people here in the room that I think can advocate for it and have the knowledge and expertise. Let's make sure everyone is working together towards that goal for a more inclusive Nairobi. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Michaela and Gloria, for the presentation on the case study report. In case you've not gotten anything, I was taking some notes, and probably this is something you can also post on Twitter, right? Using the hashtag Inclusive Nairobi. What does an inclusive Nairobi look like? I got 3 points. One is inclusive mobility, the other is inclusive infrastructure, and we also have accessible and affordable housing. I'd like to give a shout out to Anne McKinnon. I see you're very active on Twitter. And also Mary Waweru and Arab Dege. Please keep tweeting and also share the findings. To get some few key responses, probably we'll have 2 because of time. I'd like to welcome the Principal Program Officer, National Gender and Equality Commission, to just give probably 3 remarks on his thoughts on the report. Mr. John Zioka, welcome. Yes, sure. Let me just bring the mic. One. Okay, great. As he does, we can also have Tina Mngatana preparing. Tina? Okay, Mr. Nzioka, karibu.
Good afternoon, members of this team. Good afternoon once again. Amjambo tena. Musilale. We need, I think, Madam Mwaswa, the MC. I think this team requires an energizer because some of us might be sleeping. Otherwise, we might be speaking to ourselves. Thank you. Now, let me say that the partners who joined together to develop this study, I think it's a blessing to Kenyans, especially persons with disabilities. Because one, they touched on the key areas that we have challenges in Kenya. Number one, in terms of transport, Kenyans have a lot of challenges in terms of if you have a wheelchair to access the matatu. I know the matatu is the means of transport in Kenya. Our roads, the way parkings are done, where walkways and those areas, as you have found in your study, those are areas that Kenyans have serious challenges. I think I will only touch, as your recommendations touched on different stakeholders, I will only touch on the policy area because I'm in government. I work for National Gender and Equality Commission as the head of program together with the UN Habitat, and we need to compare Nairobi and Dar es Salaam. And for sure, your study responds to what our findings were. And this requires policy interventions in terms of law, in terms of user, because for those who can't see, I'm totally blind, not low vision. I have never perceived light throughout my life. So these are concerns that we will work with the necessary government agencies, private sector, and non-governmental organizations, and respond to this study, because we shall use this study as an authority or a source to respond to your findings and the recommendations. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This is Mr. John Zioka, the Principal Program Officer, National Gender and Equality Commission. I'd also like to welcome Tina Mungatana from the Ministry of Public Service, Gender, Senior Citizens Affairs, and Special Programs. Karibu.
Thank you very much. As you have heard, my name is Tina Mungatana. But as of 1st of November, we are no longer in that ministry. We are in the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection, and under the State Department for Social Security and Protection. As my colleague Mr. Nzioka said, I have a few comments on the reports. Our Deputy Director, Mr. Kama, was supposed to be here, but he was not able to join. So I am standing in on his behalf. So there are a number of issues that have been raised, and as a government, we are committed to serve the disability agenda, or to push the disability agenda forward. And we are working with various stakeholders from the disability sector to make sure that the disability agenda keeps moving forward. I know we are a few steps back as compared to other countries, but it is a top priority for government to ensure that matters of disabilities are a priority in the country. So as I have said, the ministry is called Labor and Social Protection, and as a ministry we are committed, and we have had a number of issues that have been dealt with, and I would like to speak to a few things. So on inclusion, we have established a disability interagency coordination committee. We have established a disability interagency coordinating committee to support and monitor the implementations of the commitments of the GDS and matters of disability. So this committee is an interagency committee that deals with matters of disability and how to push the disability agenda forward. And all matters of disability are dealt with in this committee. As a State Department, we have this committee is drawn from various stakeholders, some of who I can see here, and I am happy to be part of that committee. And then on policy, we have a few policies that, as a State Department, that we are working on, and the government, through the Ministry of Health and State Department for Social Protection, has developed the Rehabilitation Services and Assistive Technology Strategy 2022-2026. So the strategy is geared towards scaling up rehabilitative services and increasing access to assistive technologies, and shall be implemented over the course of the 4 years period. So that is under policy. Under accessibility, we have a few challenges, especially on matters of accessibilities in buildings. As the presentation was going on, I was looking at how many buildings will pass the accessibility test, and she mentioned a few. And as a part of Inclusive Nairobi, that is very few for persons with disability. So as a government, we are working together with stakeholders and the private sector to ensure our buildings and infrastructure is accessible to persons with disabilities. Someone might say we are moving slowly, but we are moving. So bottom line is we are moving. We are hoping that with the new government and the political goodwill as part of the recommendation, then we will get somewhere. And I would like to mention a few things on economic empowerment for persons with disabilities. As government, we ensure that persons with disabilities have access to government procurement opportunities. And the government is also committed to matters of disability programs by funding the National Fund for Disabled of Kenya and the National Council for Persons with Disabilities. These are organizations that serve persons with disabilities, and by the government funding them, it means that the government is committed to disability programs. And then we have issuance of or provisions of assistive devices through the ministry, that is the State Department, and through the National Council for Persons with Disabilities. So that is, we are ensuring persons with disabilities have access to assistive devices nearest to them at no cost, so that they can enjoy their day-to-day lives just like any other Kenyan. And on matters of inclusion, the government is trying to include persons with disabilities in all matters of development under the development agenda. So in matters of employment, empowerment, provision of financial assistance for them to start economic activities. Those are things that the government is trying to empower persons with disabilities. And I don't know if there's something that I've left out. I was taking notes as I was listening. Yes, and that's it from me. And I can say we are committed. We want to see a better Kenya. We want to see a better Nairobi. And we want to see a better Nairobi where persons with disabilities are included and empowered. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tina Mungatana from the Ministry of Social Protection. At this point, I'd like to hand over the program to Ia McKinnon, who will take us through the next segment.
Okay, thank you. So we were going to have some time for some questions, but time is a little short, and I'm also conscious that we have our audience online who've streamed in. So for those here in the room, the GDI Hub team and the partners, everyone involved in the report, are going to stick around. We will be here for the next while. We're going to have some coffee. So if anyone has any questions they would like to ask us about the report, about the work, about the study, we will be here. Please come and speak to us, come and find us, come and speak to us and ask any questions that you have. For everyone who's hopefully still watching online, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, you can put them to us, and we'll endeavour to do our very best to get back to you. Or you can get in touch with us through the various contact methods that you've seen online. So really what I would just like to do now is to wrap the formal part of the session up by really giving a vote of thanks. I'd like to thank everyone for joining and coming here today. It's really hugely appreciated to see a full room. This is actually the first of the case study reports that we've been able to launch in person because of the pandemic. So it's been very, very special for the team involved in writing the report to be here in person and to meet you all. It's been fantastic. And to do that in Nairobi in Kenya has been very special for all of us. So thank you to everyone for coming today. Thank you for everyone who joined online. Thanks again. I'd like to take the opportunity just finally to thank the funder for this piece of work and research and the AT2030 programme, so UK Aid, FCDO. So Anne, thank you so much, and fantastic that you could be here with us this week also. I'd like to thank the partners that we worked with, our local partners here in Nairobi, without which we could not have produced the report that we have. So I'd like to thank Kilimanjaro Blind Trust Africa, so Suparna and your team, thank you so much. And I'd like to thank the guys at Konkui Design Initiative. Gloria, thank you again for presenting today. And the team at KDI, thank you so much, and also for your hospitality to the GDI Hub team having been here this week. I'd like to thank all of the stakeholders and all of the disabled participants who took part in the research. Without your input, without your generosity and sharing your stories with us so openly and so honestly, again, this report would not have been possible. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts for being so open and being so honest with us and sharing your stories with us and sharing your points of view. And then finally, I think I'd just like to thank the GDI Hub team. So we, again, have been here in person for the first time for one of our case study launches. So there's a lot of the guys from GDI Hub in Nairobi this week. So thanks for everything that you've done. And thanks again to the guys at KBTA for helping support the logistics today also. So yeah, thank you very much. The report is available online. You can download it for free. We have a handful of copies with us, but we, for sustainability reasons, didn't want to print a huge number. But you can download it for free on the website. There's a QR code behind me that you can use. And as I said earlier, there's the full report, which is somewhere in the region of 100 pages. There's also an executive summary report that you can download and read. And we hope to hear from you soon. This is a piece of work that will continue next year, as I mentioned at the beginning of the session. So this is not something that we're going to do and then disappear. This is a continuous piece of work. And I loved what John and Tina said. So thank you, John, and thank you, Tina, from the national government. Something you said, John, was that you hope to use this report as a resource. And that's the purpose that we wrote this report for also. We hope that it's a useful resource and tool that can support Nairobi to progress, to become a more inclusive city. That's what we've done the research for, to have real impact and to change the lives of disabled people in the city for the better. So thank you once again. Enjoy the rest of your day. Asante-san. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Ian, before you leave, I'd just like to welcome you on stage, and probably also the key stakeholders who took part in the research, so that we can declare the report officially launched, right? Okay. The Executive Director, Kilimanjaro Blind Trust Africa, please welcome on stage. Anne McKinnon, Karibu on stage. Gloria and Michaela, you cannot miss this part. All right, who else would like to join us on stage? Okay, for those of us who can be able to stand, I'd like to request that you stand. This is the point where I would have wished the DJ had some music, but oh well, right? Okay. I think we can count down from 3, right?
Michael, wherever you are, I hope you're also ready. So we are going to count down from 3. Slowly taking our time. 1, 2, go. 3, 2, 1. The report has officially been launched. The Inclusive Infrastructure Nairobi Case Study Report has been officially launched. Okay, thank you. Let's not burn the place down. Thank you so much. You can have your seats. Okay, at this juncture, I'd like to thank all of you for making time and for sticking with us until this moment. We have come to a close. I'd like to request that there is tea served at the lobby. In case you'd want to help yourself, please feel welcome. And then